Nina, I do.
We do.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to call a 3 o'clock workshop to order. This is our regular workshop in advance of our regular city council meeting tonight. I make a few comments first before I call on Chief Bestwick here, who's number one on our agenda. As we were talking about before Sonia got on, it looks like we got another weather event coming in. There's like 4 alerts on my weather screen for just about everything under the sun. High wind, small craft, gale warning, flooding, you name it. You got it coming in here for the next couple of days. And then I know we all seem to be getting tired of doing these Zoom meetings. They just posted the Oregon COVID numbers for today, and they just don't go away. There was 1,128 cases yesterday and 64 deaths reported in Oregon, including another one in Tillamook and 10 new cases in Tillamook, another death in Tillamook, and now we're up to 37. I only bring that up to remind everybody that this deal is just not over yet. And it's real easy to think that we're back to normal, but we just aren't yet. I don't know why. I'm going into the Reinhardt Clinic with Phyllis and I tomorrow to get our booster shot on the Moderna vaccine, but it looks like we got a ways to go to get through all this. And then I wanted to bring up real quick the election last night. There were some interesting races that kind of affect the coast. The Cannon Beach, it looks like, passed their 5% food tax by a very small margin, about 20 votes or so, but it does look like it's passed, which is interesting because I think they were getting some pushback on that. And then down in Newport, they had a similar measure, but they were going for 5% on food and beverage. Cannon Beach just did it on food, but the Newport one failed. But they also in Newport tried to put on a 5% gas tax on a separate measure. And all these things revolved around infrastructure projects that they're trying to do. But so the Cannon Beach one passed and Newport didn't. And then Lincoln County has passed a motion that will eliminate short-term rental licenses in unincorporated Lincoln County. And they will, anybody that has a license now, and as I understand it, in unincorporated Lincoln County, they'll be phased out over the next 5 years. And then I took a look at it. This doesn't apply to the cities. They have quite a few cities in Lincoln County. I kind of took a look at that, and unincorporated Lincoln County is about a third of the population, 2/3 of the population of Lincoln County are unincorporated cities like Lincoln City and Newport and that. So that's going to be interesting to see how that goes down and how the rental industry responds to that. And I don't know what kind of procedures the county is going to put in place to enforce that, because as we know, we went through that here. If you don't enforce it, it doesn't work. So that's going to be interesting to watch.
Well, can I ask a quick question or
sure.
comment? I was thinking about this, and you mentioned the COVID situation, and we don't need to talk about it today, but I'm thinking we might begin to contemplate how long we want to keep the mask mandate up on Juanita Avenue. Particularly as we're in kind of the slow season, the winter season, and you won't see the crowds on Juanita, and whether it's, is it just going to be there forever and ever and ever, or are we going to try to manage that based upon how many people are on the street and what the actual risk is in an outside environment? So don't need to talk about it, but as I drive down to Juanita, I'm reminded we've got all these signs up that say mask required. I'm just not sure we're actually gaining any traction or preventing any infection by having those up, considering what the science tells us now. So,
well, I guess go ahead. Yeah, was that Hans?
Yeah, I was going to say compliance, I think, is generally low.
It's waning. Yeah, Phyllis and I were in Fred Meyer's on Monday, and they have big signs that you are required to wear a mask in Fred Meyer's by company policy and by the state of Oregon. And there were a considerable number of people in Fred Meyer's not wearing masks, and nobody challenged them.
Well, the indoor compliance here in businesses in town, I go into several every day, and yeah. I would say it's basically 100%, and all of the merchants are really on it, and so are the customers. But on the sidewalk, I think a lot of people think our signage means when you go into a store. I don't think a lot of people realize it's an outdoor policy, and there aren't many of them like that in the state. So they're probably not grasping it.
Well, I just kind of been watching what the governor in the state of Oregon says, and then she still has a mask mandate in place for indoors. And as I understand it, crowded outdoor venues. And we all assumed at the get-go that Juanita was a crowded outdoor venue, but at some point we'll have to address it again. I don't think anybody's complaining. We're not enforcing it. We're trying not to have any confrontations with anybody. I guess right now, and my gut feeling is just let it ride, see how things go. So.
My only point with it is that if you just keep it up, then it just becomes kind of ho-hum mundane. And if you actually needed a mask mandate, then it will be treated ho-hum, And
well, I think we're at the whole home already.
Well, maybe. Okay, I'm fine. Okay.
I heard a great quote just in the last couple of days. Regulation without enforcement is just a suggestion.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
That's great. Anyway, I want to talk about one other thing on the agenda tonight before we go to Chris. Want to talk about, there's been some comments about a reappointment of John Nansen to the Planning Commission. I just want to review that with everybody real quick. As everybody understands, I think the consent agenda is for non-controversial items such as the minutes, approval of bills for payment, and mayoral appointments. And we have to have a unanimous vote on a consent agenda, and it's usually, as I say, non-controversial, pretty easy. But there's been some inquiries about the reappointment of John Nansen to the Planning Commission. I just want to address that real quick, and if need to, I'll address it again tonight too. Per city procedures and state law, the mayor shall appoint all members of any board, commission, or committee in the city, and all appointed persons may be removed by the mayor at any time also. So it kind of falls into my bailiwick. John Nansen is an experienced and effective member of the Planning Commission, and he's willing to serve another term. And I think in this time of increased commercial development and activity in our community, to replace him with an inexperienced new member would not be in the best interest of the community, and I wouldn't be showing much leadership if I did that. So I'm proposing tonight, as you see, that we reappoint John. He's willing to serve another term. And as I say, he's effective and he's experienced, and we have a very experienced planning commission right now, and we need them in place with all the activity that's going on. So if he's willing to serve again, I think we ought to do that. I came from the planning commission, and when I was sitting on it, I used to think this is when I got into the council, I thought the planning commission was a tougher job than being a city councilman. You're right on the front lines with all the stuff that's going down, and it's a tough job, and it's a great place to get experience. Over time, a lot of our city councilors have come from the planning commission, and I was also looking back at the mayors that for the last 20 years, all of our mayors have come from the planning commission. Joyce Riker, Hugh McIsaac, Gary Bullard, and myself. And anyway, it's a great, people to serve on that planning commission do a great job. And I hope we'll approve John tonight. So anyway, that's my.
Can I just say, I don't think that this has anything to do with John.
It doesn't.
This is about perceived transparency and the desire by the community to understand when appointments are occurring, whether there's an open competitive process or not. And so it would be my view that we just have a process in place that says, okay, we've got an opening on the Planning Commission coming up, and we will take applications for it potentially. I mean, that would be my preference. But again, it's not about John. John's very well qualified, and I'm sure he's will be and continues to be a great addition to the Planning Commission. This is more, I think, about openings to serve the community and people wanting to have the opportunity to express interest in that, whether they're appointed or not. And I talked to Linda about this, but I'll reflect a quick story of my own experience, and that is with the commission I serve on for the tribe. About 10 years ago, we recognized the very same thing, that we were just appointing people to serve either as the continuing incumbent or even a new person. And it wasn't really being opened up to the entire membership or even the community at large, because we do have non-tribal members on the commission. And we 10 years ago went to a process where every single opening goes through the very same process, where it's announced, it's applications are taken, people are reviewed, and then an appointment is made. And it's served our purposes really, really well. People value it. They look forward to the openings and the opportunity to potentially apply. So long-winded here, but this is not about John. There's nowhere near what it's about. It's about the opportunity to participate. Used to be, I think you spent most of your time trying to twist somebody's arm into being part of
That's
it.
right.
And,
That's really right.
it was like, nobody wants to do it, so please. But in this day and age, I think we have a lot of community members that would like to express an opportunity, whether they're, again, appointed or not, to participate. So that's just my comment.
Well, the process that I have used, which is different from the previous mayor, was if there's a qualified person like John who wants to serve another term, I will reappoint them. If someone resigns or for whatever reason there's an opening or somebody doesn't want to run, again, I have opened up the process and over the last few years for budget committee, if you remember that process, and planning commission, I have done that. But in this case, I thought it was important to reappoint John. I could tell you his story, which is kind of wasting time here a little bit. But when I first came down to the community, they had an opening on the planning commission, and I called up Hugh McIsaac and said I want to be considered for the position, and go out to lunch and meet with him. And we went to coffee, and Owen Nicholson, who was head of the planning commission, went with him, and they talked to me and interviewed me, and then they turned me down and didn't appoint me to the planning commission.
Really? Oh, my
Yes.
goodness. Well, my only 2 cents, I agree with a lot of what Steve said. I think it's all about transparency. And I think doing a really good job of letting the community know when we have openings is really important. Diversity of participation is critical to the success of our community and moving forward. And I also think, which is pretty much what Mike just said, the Planning Commission is a very difficult commission. It's time consuming. There's a ramp up time that just takes time to kind of come up to speed. And I think a reappointment of somebody like John, who's great, just makes sense. So, I mean, I think if we just make sure that that we're transparent with the community and we are very clear about what we're doing, and openings are broadly broadcast, I think we're fine. I think it will work really well. And it's just that transparency that's so important.
Okay. I think we spent enough time on that, but we can talk about a little bit more tonight if we want. I will be clear in expressing to people the process, and that when there's an opening, we clearly go out and look for candidates.
That's perfect. I think that's the answer.
And you're right, Steve. There has been years in the past where you have to go find somebody.
Right.
Because nobody applies.
Well, my arm still hurts. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I know a couple of people that I will go unnamed that were appointed to the planning commission since I've been around that lasted 1 meeting and then resigned.
Oh yeah, I've known some of those too. It's
a challenge.
It's so critical to the city. I mean, it's just really important.
Okay, I'm going to shut up now. We're going to go to our first item, and we're pleased to have Chief Bestwith with us this afternoon. And thanks for joining us. I didn't realize you're out of town at a meeting.
Oh, no problem. That's one of the nice things about Zoom, right? How's my volume?
It's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. I was asked to kind of give a kind of a state of the district. So that's what I'm planning on doing for you. Feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. I'm going to try and share my screen here. Okay, I'm assuming you guys can see my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to preface this a little bit with, I've had kind of a busy couple of weeks. So I put this presentation together 2 weeks ago. So some of the numbers you're going to see are already outdated. but I'll try and mention those as I go because some of them are kind of relevant. So just a quick rundown of who we are. This is our chain of command here. We have 5 paid staff, and currently we have about 20 volunteers on the roster. Those are our responding volunteers. This doesn't include some of our responding CERT members and EBC members who we cover as well. That's just our 20 emergency responders. Out of that, we have 13 combat firefighters. What that means is that they're trained to go in and operate interior on any fires. They go through quite a bit of training for that, and I'll touch on that later. We have 6 apparatus operators, and currently we have 2 recruits that are just finishing up their initial training. We have 2 technical teams. We have a water rescue team, and that has 8 members. And we have a rope rescue team, which is 7 members. And those are both staff and volunteers that make up those teams. So all of our members are trained to at least the emergency medical responder or EMR level. The EMR we can do in-house. That's about, we do it in about 6 weeks. But that's, so everybody has at least some understanding of the medical field. So we run, because as you'll see, the vast majority of what we do is emergency medical response. Out of those volunteers, we have 9 trained as emergency medical technicians. We have 2 people preparing to take their test to be certified as advanced EMT, and we have 2 paramedics. Again, very heavy on the EMS. So we're what they call an all hazards department. Basically what that means is that if you call 911 and if it's anything other than a police matter, we're gonna show up. So just a quick rundown. We do a lot of backcountry rescue, or packouts as we call them. That's a pretty frequent call for us. Like I said, we do a lot of EMS or emergency medical. We have a very, very active water rescue team, which I'll touch on a bit later as well. We do high angle rescue. That also we do quite a bit of. We had a very critical one here just a couple of weeks ago up on the mountain with a couple of hunters. We are certified as hazmat, what they call first responders. If we have anything more than a simple call, though, we're calling in units from Astoria is our nearest hazmat unit, and other that is actually Hillsborough. But we can get on scene and start doing some stuff there. But as far as the technical hazmat training, that's way beyond our scope for training and equipment. We do a lot of vehicle extrication. This was not on a real call. She was horsing around on a training, but I love that picture. And we do a lot of community service. For example, we give out medical equipment at a no-cost basis, walkers, commodes, things like that. We also do community education. COVID has put a big hamper on that, but we're starting to get back into it. We do programs at the state park. Of course, we do programs with the schools. If anybody comes in and wants a tour of the station, we're happy to do that. So we try to be as involved as we can with community education. We had a good time at the Halloween events this past week. And we do smoke detectors. Currently, we're not installing or giving out smoke detectors. Believe it or not, you actually have to go through a training program to do that. We are working on that. But right now, we'll come in and check them for you, clean them out, change the batteries, things like that. But hopefully in the near future, we will be doing installs and replacements. And we do a lot of invalid assists, people that fell down and just simply can't get back up, or they need help out to their car for a doctor's appointment, things like that. We do quite a bit of that. We're just starting to really delve deeply into the wildland fire response. We just upgraded our brush truck, which you're seeing in that picture. We're going out on the statewide conflagrations and some of the pre-deployments. We were out 5 times this past summer on various events. And of course, fire response, which is our bread and butter, but we don't do nearly as much as that as we do of other things. But of course, when you think firefighter, that's what you think. So kind of our rundown of our year. And this is year to date as of October 26th, like I said. Year to date, we've run 820 calls. In the past year, we ran 683 at this point. That's a 20% increase over the year before. Kind of the rundowns of calls, 17 of those were fires. Like I said, mostly medical, 530 medical or rescue calls, a couple of hazardous condition calls, lots of service calls. That would be, like I said, your smoke detectors or your invalid assists, and some false calls and other special incident types. But really the biggest takeaway from this graph is the 20% increase over last year. From 683 calls, 137 call increase to 820. I looked at the numbers today, and we were at 863 as of today. That's more than we ran all last year, and we're probably going to top 1,000 calls this year. I thought it was worth mentioning that of those 820 calls, 18 of those were what we call mutual aid calls, which is assisting other districts with their calls, whether it be fires, 2 fires, 9 rescue. Most of that is water rescue. Like I said, I wanted to touch on that. Our water rescue team is actually the only water rescue team between Seaside and Garibaldi being the Coast Guard. So we cover any call in Rockaway, of course, our area, and then up towards Cannon Beach. We've even gone so far as Gearhart Seaside on some rescues. So that is the vast extent of our mutual aid calls. And that is a 500% increase over last year. And I think if you were to ask me why that increase is because of the massive influx of visitors we had this year. Out of those 820 calls, 245 of them involved non-residents, or almost 1/3 of our calls. And I thought this was worth mentioning, COVID impact. Obviously, COVID is a big deal in the state and nationwide, worldwide, but it's not had a huge impact on our EMS runs here, believe it or not. Out of those 530 calls, we've had 4 confirmed and 8 suspected COVID calls. And of course, there could be a lot of others that we just didn't know because they hadn't been diagnosed yet, or they didn't quite meet the standards for being suspected. But we did run a whole lot of breathing calls, headache calls, things like that could have turned out to be COVID. And actually, like I said, so this was October 26th. If you ran this number right now, the confirmed would probably be up to 12 incidents, because we have run a lot this past week. Like I said, really, we're not seeing that in the EMS field so much because it's generally not emergent. People get sick, they go to their doctor, or they recognize that they may have COVID symptoms. They go to their doctor, they go to the hospital. Usually it's not involving us too much until they get really, really sick. On the other side of that, though, something that we have never done in the past, but we stepped up to the plate this year because I felt it was so important, is we were giving COVID immunizations. So between January and May, Nehalem Bay Fire ran 27 programs, and we gave 1,468 immunizations to 764 recipients. So if you look at the numbers, the immunization rates for Manzanita were way, way higher than anybody else in the state at the time. And I think that's because we did so well as a community as making sure those were available. Back to the training, I just wanted to show what our volunteers have to do for training. So this is just kind of a graph of what we've done this year so far. Again, we've done 95 classes for a total class hours of 261 and student hours of 1,917. That includes both the initial training for a firefighter, which I said is 110 hours, and then also 72 hours of continuous training that they have to complete every year to remain certified as an interior firefighter. Again, EMS being such a big deal for us, they have to do 30 EMS continuing education hours annually. That's for the EMT level. Paramedics have to do quite a bit more. Paramedic is a 2-year degree. The EMT class is 2 semesters long. You can't really see it on that graph, but in that orange graph, that's just a quick rundown of all the various types of training that we're required to hit throughout the year. So just threw that up as kind of a shout out to our volunteers. When they dedicate themselves to the department, they really dedicate themselves. It's just not about showing up when the pager goes off. they have to do a whole lot of training. We do a 2-hour drill every week. They're required to come to 85% of those. And then the special teams, the water and the road team, do an additional 4 hours a month on top of that. Quick rundown of our budget. Most of you may know this. We have an ad valorem tax of $1.15 per thousand of assessed value. So our projected revenue for this year, that was supposed to be 21-22, not 21-21, is $1,362,349. A big shout out here in 2011, we did a 20-year bond to pay for the construction of 2 fire stations. We paid off 85% of those bonds July 1st of this year, and the remainder will be paid off before January 1st. So we will be debt-free by the end of this year. That's an estimated $800,000 in interest saved for the district through that early payoff. And over the past year, we have received nearly $400,000, actually over $400,000 through grants, the CARES Act, reimbursements for services given, and a few pretty good sized donations. Which leads me to our new equipment that we've been getting. All of this has been actually non-budgeted equipment, except for the last one, which I'll get into. But this was all received through grants and donations. So this one I was really proud of. This was done through a federal grant, the Assistance to Firefighters grant, and we got a Lucas device. What a Lucas device is a hands-off CPR device. And the biggest reason I wanted to get this beyond patient care is kind of like what you see in this picture. When we're in the back of an ambulance doing CPR on these horrible, horrible roads, either going to Seaside or Tillamook, you physically cannot be seatbelted when giving care. And that just really, really makes me nervous. I hate the fact that we have 3 or 4 people in the back of an ambulance not belted on these roads going with lights and sirens. So my big selling point on why we got this Lucas device was for the hands-off CPR. That removes actually two additional people from the back of the ambulance, and the ones remaining can actually be seated and belted, which is huge. On the other side of that is it has a massive impact on patient outcome. It's a very efficient machine. It gives perfect chest compressions, which is huge for patient outcome, to the point where we've actually had to develop a protocol for when patients regain consciousness during CPR. You have to continue with the CPR, but now you actually have to figure out how to keep them comfortable while you're doing that. And that has actually happened on one occasion already. The next thing we got was this really cool little UTV. I got this primarily for some of our trails and backcountry rescues. It's just like it's pictured in this photo, although this isn't our actual unit. This was a stock photo, but it's got a little fire pump on it. It's got a backboard carrier, and it actually will hold up to 6 people, but it's small and compact. And it has been really great for our beach access calls. It's been a godsend as far as that goes. So we're thrilled to add that to our arsenal, so to speak. Our other little thing we bought, this was purchased through donations. If you guys remember, well, I guess it's been 1.5 years now, when a young woman fell off the side of Neocani Mountain while taking photos. Her family has become very involved with the district, and through their fundraising efforts, we were able to purchase this UAV. So the UAV's name is Casey, in remembrance of the Casey family who donated it. This has been a really neat addition. It's for search and rescue. It's been invaluable. We have the ability to drop life preservers out in the ocean. We're getting a big spotlight for it so we can see at night. And it has this really amazing camera on it, which has both a 200 times zoom and infrared. So I'm going to show this quick little video. This is from a training fire we did out on the North Fork, where this is actual drone footage. This isn't cut or spliced or anything. But I'm going to play this real quick, and it'll show the how valuable that infrared is. So this is just obviously a normal look at it, and then this is the infrared. And just through the infrared, we can see exactly where that fire is. So if you look at the right, looking at the building, you can't really tell where the fire is. So we're sending our firefighters in a completely blacked out, smoky condition if we have this drone up, we can tell them exactly where they need to go, which in firefighter speak is the Charlie Delta corner, but basically the back right corner of the house. So you can see how bright it is through that window. And if you see that other window on the left is completely cool. So now we know exactly where the fire is in that building. So it's been a real invaluable tool for us, and we have used that on several calls since getting it. And this is going to be our next acquisition. We have signed the contract for this. This is what they call a WUI engine, Wildland Urban Interface Engine. We did a supplemental budget for this, and we will be doing a lease purchase agreement to get this. But this, we're expecting to have this delivered by next April or May. And so the essential thing for this is that it's good for both wildland and urban firefighting. It meets all the standards of what we call a structural engine or an urban engine, but it's got high clearance and four-wheel drive, and it's quite a bit shorter than our standard engine. So we're really excited to add this to the fleet. And like I said, this should be here in April or May is when we're expecting delivery. So some of our current issues that we're facing in the fire district, low volunteer roster is always an issue. It's a nationwide issue for any combination or volunteer department. I think it's a little more difficult for us here because of our demographics. We don't have the industry or the jobs that really pull in the younger people. So we have a different demographic that we have to pull from. Currently, we have about 8 or 10 consistent responders out of those 20 on the roster. And our average turnout for a call is 2 or 3 volunteers. Now, if we get a really big fire or something like that, more will show up, but out the door every time when we call is really about 2 or 3 volunteers. I'd like to see that number more like 8 to 10 is where I would be happy. One of the tying issues with that is our increase in call volume. Like I said, 2021 so far, it has been 20% higher than 2020. And in perspective, 2020 was 20% higher than 2019. So it's a compounding issue that is, like I said, it's a nationwide issue compounded here. So that's something we're going to need to address. If anybody has any ideas, please let me know. I'm sure you guys have probably heard about this. I really kicked the hornet's nest with this. We've been dealing with the delayed ambulance response since long before I got here, but it has really come to a critical level where I'm no longer being quiet about it, and I'm really pushing this into the public forum. So I want everybody to be aware of this and know what we're dealing with, because when we show up on scene, that's great, but really definitive care is getting somebody in the ambulance and to the hospital. That's where your golden hour truly stops, is when you get to the hospital. So the standard as written is that they should be able to respond to 80% of all calls within 7 minutes and 95% of all calls in less than 20 minutes. What they're doing currently is an average response time, which is just around 19 minutes. That's dropped a little bit since I wrote this, just because I've made this very public and they're making a concerted effort. But overall, that's just a really pathetic average. And that's their average. They've made that 20-minute response time on only 50% of the calls for the past 2 months. We are working to rectify the problem. Like I said, one of the biggest things I've done is tried to make it as public as possible. This has been an issue for a long time. There are no short-term solutions, but there are some long-term solutions, and hopefully we'll get there with those. But that is probably the #1 issue facing our community right now as far as emergency response goes. So just a quick rundown of what I have planned for the future. Like I said, my biggest thing is volunteer recruitment. These are some of the programs I'd like to see us work on. Is we do have room for resident volunteers. We actually have 5 living quarters that we can have people actually physically live in our stations for free. So if somebody actually wants to live on the coast and pursue either a firefighting career or an EMS career, we are willing to put them up in our quarters as long as they respond on calls with us. I'm working on a cadet program, which is bringing in people under the age of 18, getting them into in the door, so to speak. They're limited in what they can do on scenes, but it's a good way to get people interested in the career and interested in volunteering down the road. And we are looking at some volunteer incentives. Pay really is not the biggest thing that we can do for them, but there are some other things such as tuition reimbursement that we're pursuing, and even some things such as a retirement program for volunteers that they can join in. So anything I can do to increase our volunteer staff. This is something I'd like to see come down the pipe pretty soon. I'm working on some various plans to see how I can make this happen, but that would be a small fire training facility, which would be out at our substation. Nothing real elaborate, but we need some somewhere that we can do some more in-depth training on live fire conditions. Generally, the only time our firefighters get to see live fire conditions in a training scenario is when a home is donated to us to burn, and those are infrequent. And one of the issues with that is that they have all the inherent dangers of a true house fire, where a training facility is much more controlled and repeatable, something we can do over and over and over again. So this is really high on my list of priorities for the near future. And this is something that I'm working on a grant for now. I'm hoping that the Spire grant, will have this on again this year when it comes out, is a high water rescue vehicle. This wouldn't be something that I just purchased for the department. It's just simply not in our budget or in the plan. But if I can find some grant monies for this, this would be a great tool to add to our arsenal. And we have our current water rescue vehicle is a 1996 four-wheel drive Ford cargo van. And so I'd like to see that get replaced soon. And this would be something ideal that could actually get down on the beach with our jet skis. And in the event of flood conditions, we could actually get out on the roads and into the neighborhoods, even if they are flooded to some degree. So like I said, that's not something that will be coming directly out of the funds, but I'm working hard on grant opportunities for that vehicle. And next down the thing is a staffing increase. We're reaching the point based on that volunteerism that we're going to have to start looking at hiring more full-time firefighters. Simply that increase in call volume and that decrease in volunteerism. I would like to see us have a minimum of 2, if not 3 more full-time firefighters on the roster within the next 3 years. I haven't told my board that yet, but that is the plan, at least from my side. We'll see how that goes when I bring that up. So that's kind of the state of the district as it stands right now. So I am more than happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Chris?
Questions from the council? Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question about reimbursements. I'm just curious. I know that some districts in the state, I hear that they charge for certain types of rescues, especially like where serious negligence is involved and people just get themselves into really expensive rescues for doing something entirely stupid, going way off trail, etc. Are there any actual charges from the district to people for rescues?
Currently, the only thing we charge for are motor vehicle accidents when the people involved do not live in the district. We can charge for rescues. I haven't gone that route yet, just because I hate to see the person get charged directly when they've had an accident. Most insurance companies will not pay for a rescue, although they will pay for a motor vehicle accident. And if the insurance companies don't pay, we don't pursue it past that. Unless it's been something, say a impaired driver or something, we will go after them personally. I did let my staff know that, for example, the Neocani Mountain Trail is closed. If somebody willfully goes around that clothesline, climbs up there, gets hurt, we will be charging them as well. As of right now, that's all we charge for, though.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, Chris, how many other fire departments in Tillamook County do what you do? And Are the aging demographics part of the reason for your increased number of medical calls? And then I have a question about the ambulance in just a minute.
Okay, so there are currently 7 fire agencies in Tillamook County, and we all have pretty similar response profiles other than the special rescue. I'm not sure who else has a rope rescue team. Like I said, we are the only water rescue team north of Garibaldi. Garibaldi does not have one. Oceanside, Netart's Oceanside has a water team. They're the only other water team. They're the only other water team in the county. Okay.
My second, and is it the aging demographics that is that driving the increase, do you think, or is it?
We just this past year started tracking the number of visitors, and I think the visitors have been the impact on like I said, 30% of our calls this past year have been people who do not live in, even as part-time residents, people who simply don't live here at all, 30%. Okay.
And then lastly, I've been aware of the ambulance issues for a long time. I mean, they've just been there, but it used to be that there was a pretty good partnership between the ambulance and the fire district. A volunteer might drive the ambulance to the hospital or help out in terms of getting people transported to Portland. Is that still the case, and kind of what's happening along those lines?
So it's funny that you mentioned the volunteers driving. That came to an end after a conversation with my insurance provider, and we found out that we are not insured at all when we're driving those ambulances. And I immediately said, well, we can't do it anymore. Suggested that Adventus change their insurance policy to cover our volunteers when they're driving. And so far that hasn't happened. We are more than happy to get in the back and continue rendering care. We just cannot drive the ambulance.
Okay.
Chris, I'd like to, I'm sorry, I'd like to follow up on the ambulance issue. So I think you mentioned that there don't appear to be any short-term fixes, but there are long-term fixes that you've been looking at or working on, and I guess I'm curious about if you have time to outline some of those for us, and also if specifically there's anything the city can do to aid with those long-term fixes.
First of all, I want to be very careful that I'm not throwing Adventist under the bus here because they have been providing a good service. Just like everybody else, they're having staffing issues. They're having a very, very difficult time getting paramedics, getting EMTs to come down here and work. Simply based for what they get paid, they can't afford to live here. So the vast majority of the EMTs and paramedics live up in Salem, Hillsborough, somewhere on the other side of the mountains, and drive down here to work. So that's, like I said, I don't want to throw Adventures under the bus, but they could pay more. As far as long-term solutions, what I would really like to see happen, and I have not pursued this at all, but I think the best thing that the county could do would be to create an EMS district that overlies the entire county, and that EMS district be in charge of providing ambulance service. That's not a new model. I know Sutherland does that. I believe there are a couple others in the state that do that. But the biggest benefit of that is it takes the profit margin away. It would take a very small tax, I think, to get it up and running for a few years. And then I honestly feel that through direct billing, it could be self-sustaining probably within 5 years. I cannot base this any of this in fact or numbers. This is purely me spitballing. But that would be my number one recommendation for a solution to the ambulance problem, would be a freestanding district. There are some other options. Everybody looks towards the fire agencies and says, well, if the ambulances, can you guys provide ambulances? I could, but it would triple my budget. So something would have to be done to fund it.
So Chris, is there ongoing discussions going on between the county commissioners and Adventist and maybe yourself on how to solve this thing, or
There is the Fire Defense Board, which are the 7 fire chiefs. The Fire Defense Board had a meeting with the county commissioners a few weeks ago. Just let them know what our concerns were, and we talked about some short-term and long-term solutions. The other thing is we're working on revising the ambulance service agreement, which is the agreement for providing ambulance service, as the name entails. That agreement was put in place in 1988, has changed very little since. So if you can imagine the demographics change and the call volume change, and we're still running exactly the same numbers that they were in 1988. So that's what we're trying to address. We have a meeting here in the next week or so, I actually think it is, and hopefully we will be doing the final revisions to that ambulance service agreement and putting it out for approval by the Board of Commissioners. So.
I have one more question on the ambulance thing. When there's a 911 call for an ambulance, do you automatically send out a team from the fire department to assist the ambulance?
Yes, we do. It's what we call a QRT, or a quick response team. And Nehalem Bay Fire runs a quick response, Rockaway does, Garibaldi does, and Netarts does. But yes, we go out immediately. Our average response and on-scene time is just under 6 minutes. So people are getting care. They're just not getting that definitive treatment and transport and treatment at the hospital in a timely manner. But they are getting care quickly.
Yeah, in the 30 years I've been down here, we've always had one ambulance in North County, and we still have one ambulance in North County. And I had the pleasure of having to make a 911 call a few months ago, and your guys showed up in minutes, and they were taking care of me. And they said, the good news is we're here to help you, but the bad news is the ambulance isn't going to be here for 30 minutes.
Right. That one ambulance in North County is the first one to get shut down if they have a staffing issue. So right now, I'd say that ambulance is actually being staffed. Oh, I don't want to throw out any definitive numbers, but I'd say it's probably less than half the time right now.
Wow.
Really?
Is there anything the city can do to support that the further negotiations with you and Adventist? Anything that will help?
Honestly, I think at this point, now that the issue has become quite public, I think that's really what they needed. So it is now on the front burner, and they're looking at it very hard.
Okay.
So for now, I think that's enough. And I thank you for those calls. So.
Well, let us know, because we really do want to support you, Chris, for sure.
Chief, I had one quick question, and that is whether going forward, are you looking at more of a tiered response? Are you, as I understand it right now, you get an ambulance on pretty much every EMS, whether it's ALS or BLS or whatever it is, and whether you can move more towards a tiered response to keep the ALS available more often. And I don't know about Oregon law about requiring ambulances to be ALS and all that, but it just seems to me in a rural area like this where ALS services are, not very available, as if we could figure out a system to allow the ALS to just be prioritized and send BLS on, which is, I would imagine, 75% of your calls.
I don't disagree with that. In fact, the ASA as it stands right now requires 2 paramedics on the ambulance. And that was one of the things I said is, if you're having such a difficult time finding paramedics, it can still be 1 paramedic and 1 EMT and still qualify as ALS. And I would not be opposed to having a tiered response either. That does put a large onus on our dispatchers, who are already pretty strapped to make that call on whether it's going to be an ALS or BLS response. But we could certainly talk about that at our next meeting, because it's a good idea.
Well, the protocols for dispatchers have been refined by so many people that I think you would find that it's already out there and available, and they just follow a checklist essentially to identify. Anyway, I just was curious whether that's one of the items that you're thinking about for the future.
I was hesitant to go as far as a BLS ambulance, But I thought it was a pretty big concession to say, well, we only need one paramedic. Of course, that's easy for me to say because I am a paramedic. So,
Well, the truth is I'm sure you probably will attest that the vast majority of your transports could be BLS and
Absolutely.
don't require an ALS level of service. And you hate to see an ALS unit go to Tillamook or go to Seaside when a BLS unit could have transported them. So
right, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the other issues is they do a whole lot of interfacility transports between Tillamook Hospital up over into Portland. That takes an ambulance out of the area for at least 4 hours. So we've asked that they consider either a BLS unit or even a transport van for some of those calls to keep the ambulances where they belong for emergency medicine.
This has been very informative. We're going way over our time here. Is there any questions from the public? We got 22 people on the call here this afternoon.
We've got no hands raised. No.
Okay. So Chris, we have you on the agenda tonight. Are you joining us tonight too for a little bit?
I am. It'll be essentially a repeat.
Okay. We're going to have to condense this a little bit because we've spent pretty much an hour talking here. Can we condense that down to 5 to 10 minutes, hopefully?
I'll do my best. I'll talk faster. I'll clean it.
You give us some of the slides are great. I think if you just kind of summarize on the slides, and we'll take a few questions, but I'm going to have to control the time a little better this evening, or we'll never get through our agenda.
Not a problem.
And I appreciate you taking the time to do a double shift, and you're not even in town. Well, anybody got anything else for Chris, or we'll see him tonight?
Well, I just have one thing to say, and it's been true of the fire department since its inception. It is a huge gift to our community. The comments that we get from our neighbors and friends when you show up, you have a professional team that really cares about the residents, knows most of the residents when they show up, and just does an incredibly professional job. And it's made a huge difference having a regional response and having the level of training and commitment that your volunteers have. We're just very, very lucky to have you, and we really appreciate all you do, you and your team, Chris. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. It's our honor, believe me.
Well, thanks again, and we'll see you tonight at 6.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll see you then.
All right, thanks, Chief. Layla, we're running a little behind, but I think you're next, and we're going to talk about the disposition of the old City Hall building on Juanita.
Yeah, I know. I love the focus on time. This is great, but I think we're doing pretty good. Thank you. So I wanted to pick up on the conversation we started having last time. We had just gotten the appraisal. We started diving into a conversation about kind of what the disposition process, so how do we sell the property at 543 Juanita. So I wanted to have a discussion at the work session with you all, answer any questions, kind of try to get through the details on that. And my hope was at the regular session meeting, y'all would feel comfortable enough to make a motion to choose a method so that I can cut loose on getting the property up for sale. So just to kind of remind folks, I did sort of outline just briefly a staff report, but they're kind of two different methods we had talked about last time. One is a bid method, and then one is, traditional broker. The bid method is something I've done in the past. Before, it was because it was required. The city I worked for previously required a bid process for disposition of property. We don't have those same requirements. So it's really kind of our call. And I've checked with the city attorney, and we're allowed to do either. So there's no legal reason to do one or the other. A bid process basically is what it sounds like. We kind of put the property up for bid. We place a minimum sale value. We accept sealed bids. We do all the marketing, all the outreach, all the advertising, we being me. So we're doing all that. And then we get bids, we set a date, we accept those bids. If we get one that meets the mark, then we advance with that bid. If we get several that meet the mark, then likely we would go through a process with council to select somebody. And then we would go through the sale process. Then I would still have to hire a broker to help with that, because there's just a lot of the transactional details that you want somebody who's a professional doing that.
Right.
So getting through title and closing and all of that. So there would still be a cost associated with that. And then the other option is just hiring a broker, getting that person to use their professional expertise to do the deal. They handle pretty much everything, and then they take a commission. So if we did a bid, we'd have to pay a broker kind of by the hour up front. I'd probably need to get a contract with somebody. Through a brokerage process, we just select a broker, and then they get paid out of the commission. So we would have an agreement with that broker as well. So either one requires an agreement, but the payment gets done differently. So that's kind of high level overview. There's some experts here on our city council that might have some other other information to offer, but I wanted this to just be an open conversation with the council. And if there's any questions I could answer about the process, I could tell you my preference is to hire a broker for just I think having someone who's professional, who knows how to market these kinds of properties would be beneficial, in addition to just the time savings for myself. But I do think that would probably get us the best price and probably the quickest sale. But again, that's just my opinion, and welcome hearing what y'all have to say about this.
Well, I'm no expert on this, but my gut feeling is that the bid process in a small town like this on the Oregon coast is different than doing a bid process in a larger municipality in the valley, is kind of what I think. And I want to hear what Hans has to say.
Yeah, me too.
Well, my main reservation about doing the bid process is the expense upfront, the professional fees involved, and perhaps to no avail and with no result. And I know myself personally that commissions are a terrific motivator to produce and perform. My compensation is a 100% commission. I don't get a paycheck from anybody. So I think that a local broker with commercial experience will be very driven and engaged and want to make something happen. And the cost to the city up front is zero.
Hans, how many local brokers with commercial experience will we have to choose from, would you say?
Well, probably not a lot. I mean, I've done, I think, at least 3, maybe 4 commercial transactions this year, and I wouldn't call myself a commercial broker. So there are a couple. They're not in Manzanita, but they're nearby enough that they would certainly be comfortable working in this market. So I think that we would have a couple of options, and given that at least for now, demand has been pretty strong, even on the commercial side, I think that we would have a certain amount of leverage for some pretty decent commission pricing. I mean, back in the day, commercial commission would be at least 6%, and I think that could be negotiated down a fair amount from that point.
So for a lot of reasons, I think I would favor the broker approach. But I'm curious, is it likely we're going to have a broker come on and, or should we expect the broker to question the appraisal? The broker's not going to want to sell a property that's overvalued if it is overvalued. We don't know that, but there was some concern when we talked about the number last month. Should we expect the broker to come in and tell us where we really belong?
Well, I think they'll have an opinion, certainly, but generally, if an appraisal is done in a professional manner, brokers enjoy having that as a resource to point to value. And I don't disagree with any of the rationale used in that appraisal. The most important element of that appraisal that I'm inclined to follow is that it talks a lot about market time and market exposure. And that appraisal is really based on a technique that isn't exactly the bid process. And I think that to get towards that 800,000, 775, whatever it ends up being, I think it's going to take some time, some market time for some, some nuancing, some conversations. People are going to scratch their heads. And, as Mike said, this is a different market. It's both by process, it's a little bit different given the nature of the size of our communities and location, but the buyer is also different because there is not a lot of money in developing commercial property at the coast. The land values are very high, the construction costs are high, and the rents are average comparatively to the costs. So I think having time on market and time for people to kind of think about things and scratch their head, I think that'll help. And I don't think the appraisal is way off. It's a bit on the high side, but generally you'd want a list price to be a bit on the high side.
And it's important too to remember about the appraisal, and a good broker will help us set a good price, is that it did assume that it was a vacant lot. And so there's some kind of residual costs associated with that would affect the price. And so that's the nice thing about having a broker, is that they do bring a professional opinion, will evaluate that and help guide us to a good price, I think.
I have a question, I guess, and that is, I also agree that a broker approach seems the most appropriate. But the one reason I think about it being good for us is, and I'll ask the question, if we go to a bid process, are we not more or less obligated to take the highest bid for the property? I realize there's some flexibility, but for the most part, we're taking the highest bid. If we go to a broker, do we have more latitude in accepting a negotiated offer? And the reason I ask that, if we have two competing parties, not likely, but potentially because of the market, looking at that piece of property, and one wants to build a discotheque and one wants to build a library or something, do we have the flexibility to kind of manage how that property turns out? And so that was the one thing I was thinking about, is that we have more control over how that property is sold, essentially.
I think we would. No, with a broker process, I think we would have much more flexibility, latitude.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, for the reasons that you stated, Councilor Nuttall. I think that, if we would just have more flexibility negotiation, whereas a bid, a sealed bid, you get it in a piece of paper, and that's what it is. And the last process I worked on, just for background, we were super lucky because we got the asking price for the bid that we wanted for the use that we wanted, but the follow-up bids weren't that far behind, and they were not great uses. And so it really highlighted to me an issue in the process, is that had we not gotten that other bid that was what we wanted, we would have been kind of stuck with a bid for something that we weren't actually super excited about.
Well, you said it much more eloquently than I was able to ask the question, but yes.
One thing I would like us to consider, I think we can certainly make a decision on how to go about disposing of this piece of property. Sounds like from what Hans is saying, we're not going to, probably not going to flip it in a matter of weeks. It's going to be a long process. And so during that process, I hope we can find the time to consider other property that we may have, we may be surplusing in the future, so that we can take somewhat of a strategic approach to it. I don't want us to be in a position where we cash in a piece of property when we need some money, without having some kind of a longer term vision and plan for disposing of any property that might be surplus in the future. And so I know, Leila, you mentioned in your memo the possibilities with the old firehouse and the current city hall, temporary city hall. I really appreciate that. And I think a lot of people probably spotted that and saw some rays of hope there about possibilities. There might be excess lots up at Underhill. I think there's some other property that, unimproved property that we own. And I think it would just be a good opportunity if we're going to do this, and it's not going to happen fast. We're going to have plenty of time to think about being in the position of being a seller of real estate. It would be a good opportunity for us to take a look down the road and look at all of our holdings and see if there are other opportunities and other plans we may have for those properties.
Well, that's music to my ears when people say strategy and longer term planning. It makes me so excited. So thank you for noting that, Councilor Stegman. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is trying to pull together a comprehensive spatial, like a map of all of the property that we own, so that we actually have a really clear picture of all the property that the city's own. So that's a work in progress, won't be done immediately. But you're right. I think having strategy around how we dispose of property, understanding the extent of properties that we have, is really going to be important. And yeah, it was important to me to mention that, because I do think it's important for us to have a nexus and a reason why we're selling stuff, because we don't want to just offload it because we need cash, right? That's not what you're going for. So I think the selling of City Hall, the fund of City Hall, is a solid nexus, but the other properties we do have a lot of opportunity to leverage some pretty amazing public benefit. And so I'll be keeping you folks posted, but that's definitely one of the things that's been on my list, is really trying to understand what our real estate assets are, and getting, we have a lot of stuff on paper and in files, and I'm trying to get it to where we can actually physically see it. What do we own and where is it?
Thank you.
Okay, so tonight we're going to have a public hearing on this first, right, Layla? And
That's
I'll open
correct.
the public hearing and we'll take public comment. And then after we're done with that, we'll close the public hearing, and then we're going to be asked to make a decision on how we want to dispose of this property. There's one of these two methods. It sounds like we're pretty much in consensus on how we want to go forward. So probably have to
That's great.
pass a resolution and give Layla instructions on how to go to the next step. Anybody have any other questions on this at this point? Well, okay, so we'll
Awesome. Thank you so much.
we'll deal with that tonight. And the last thing we're going to talk about here, I think today, is the visitor center update. Are you taking that, Hans, or Layla? You taking that first?
Well, I can take part of it.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
not
and Hans,
exactly,
Nan is here too, so
okay.
just as a heads up.
So my part of this isn't so much specifically the visitor center, but I wanted to give you an update about a very informal meeting that we had of the off-season tourism promotion committee. It was very casual in the sense that there are only 2 standing members of that committee that still are in active terms. My position as chair expired in December of last year, and 2 of the committee members, their terms also expired in December of last year. So COVID has pretty much closed down this off-season tourism committee. But they were all but one member was able to show up, and we had a nice Zoom meeting, and there were some great ideas put forth. I think that there was consensus on the main points that came up. There wasn't much disagreement. There were some, really, unique ideas coming from just about everybody there. I think that there was agreement that at least right now, and maybe for the foreseeable future, there is probably very little need to promote off-season tourism. That we have a lot more people in town than we're used to having in the off-season. And when this committee was envisioned by Mayor Bullard some years ago, it was a different picture in the off-season than it is now. Matt Ruana, the only commercial member of the committee who came, he did make a great point, which is that at some point in time, when the events that we used to try to focus on in the off season to bring people here in the off season, we were mostly, encouraging local organizations to have events. And given the couple of years that these events have been shut down by COVID, when those things start to wake up again, and who knows when that will be, there probably will be some need, and some help would probably be very beneficial in kind of promoting and getting these events back as a going concern, because it's an industry and an activity that is pretty much shut down still. But I think I don't think anybody on the committee felt like, yes, let's get back together and let's start promoting off-season tourism. There was none of that energy there. There was also a great suggestion that if there is a similar committee going forward, that the scope should be a little bit wider, and that promoting tourism should also, and I'm glad that Nan is here because I'd like her to speak a little bit to this, because it sounds like the county has much more comfort or familiarity with dealing with the restaurant and hotel lobby. But things like employee support, workforce housing, transportation costs, just some of the other backstory pieces of the tourism industry. It would be great if there is a committee that they were focused on those aspects, and that this wasn't such a very hyper-focused committee for promoting tourism in the off-season and looking more at destination management than tourism promotion purely. Communication came up by more than one of us, that it was really important to keep communication strong, and the messaging, communication all the way around, communicating with merchants about opportunities, communicating with residents about why the committee, if there is a committee going forward, why it exists, what its purpose is. And if the county does become, and maybe this will be a segue into talking about the county, but if county becomes involved with a visitor center, I see a potential use for a committee to communicate with the county and make sure that the county is kind of getting our feedback and is aware of what our community concerns are about tourism, and that any involvement they have with the visitor center is oriented towards those kinds of concerns. And a great example of, I mentioned workforce housing and employee support, but another aspect that I hope that Nan can speak to a little bit. We have a great trails need. There's a lot of energy pent up behind trails, and it would be terrific if there is some participation from county with the visitor center. I believe it sounds like one use for off-season, or not off-season, for tourism promotion money would be a trail work, and getting kind of jump starting that process of the trails committee and trails work. So that's kind of, we had about an hour-long meeting. I hope I kind of got everybody's ideas in there.
Okay, got anything to add to that, Layla? Or
No, I think it's a really good summary of the discussion. I did want to point out, and as Hans mentioned, I did too, that Nan Devlin's here. And after our last meeting, Nan and I fortuitously had a meeting scheduled the next day. So we got together and talked quite a bit. I learned a lot, so much from Nan. And what came out of that meeting was the county's kind of willingness and offer to potentially assist and help us in a transition time. And so Nan gave me a proposal to look at, no real details yet, but the main thing would be kind of working with us to maintain a visitor center, and then working on what, and maybe she can talk a little bit more about it, but a destination management plan. So that really resonated with me as we talked about tourism and the resources that we have available to us to promote tourism, and what other ways that we could be thinking about it more holistically, because I think that, and probably everyone here would agree, that we don't necessarily need to advertise for people to come here or promote our town. I think people know where we are and where to come. So it's more of managing the impacts to ensure that continued livability for the folks that live here and for the people that come to visit. And so that really resonated with me, this idea of coming up with a destination management plan. And I know she's working on one of those with, I believe, Rockaway and Garibaldi. So that was really appealing to me. And then also kind of working with this, with them to help us kind of understand better at what level and like who's managing the visitor center so that we can kind of redefine it perhaps through this planning process. So so that was the general tenet of the proposal is getting the county's support potentially to sort of bridge the gap until we figure out what we want to do with that space. And then in the meantime, we're developing a destination management plan as well, so that it gives us some more structure and strategy to how we're spending those resources and on what. So that would be my hope in the end, is that I can start to work with the county on moving forward with getting a proposal around this.
So Nan, are you with us today? Someplace
Yes.
hiding on the screen somewhere?
Yes.
Yeah, and she just got back
There
from
she is.
vacation, so I'm super glad that she's here today. So
So I know I saw some of the things you sent us in writing about what you thought you could do for us. I mean, kind of give us an idea what you're thinking as far as how we can work with your organization to
Sure.
run our visitor center.
So, yeah, we had a meeting with Leila. It was, and I did tell her what we changed to in late 2018. We changed our benchmarks and our whole approach. We took advantage of a brand new tourism board as we became a 501c6 to change from promoting, which I'd been kind of fighting for a while, to destination management. And that's really based on the principles of sustainable tourism, which is about people, place, and profit. And what that really means is tourism benefiting the community, bringing benefits to its people and community? Is it protecting your natural resources and the values that you have for your town? And 3, is it empowering economic vitality for your businesses, especially for workforce and year-round employment? But sustainable tourism is great. All those principles are, kind of highfalutin, but you put it into practice through destination management. And destination management is the city, agencies, maybe land managers, everybody that might be involved in your town public works, because it deals with infrastructure, and the tourism organization. And you decide what you value most, what your assets are, and then you create initiatives to support all those things. And we've done that. We're just doing 11 initiatives that include public safety, community development, business support. We are down to like 2 things, I think, that we promote. And that is the North Coast Food Trail, because it's our agreement with all of our members on the food trail. And we also do outdoor recreation in our new GIS map. But other than that, we aren't advertising. And I think too, after meeting with several cities, that they're not aware that they can use their TLT for tourism related facilities, and a trail is considered a tourism related facility. There is in state law a sentence that says tourism facilities include real property with a lifespan of 10 years. So that can be at least 10 years. So that can be a trail. It can be signage. It can be improvement. Like for instance, Pine Grove got a grant from the facilities grant from the county to do roof repairs, because that's considered a tourism related facility. So the benefit of doing a community-based destination management plan is that you can plan out long-term expenditures using the TLT. And it does not have to go for promotion. I would say that if we go into a recession, that you would want to promote, especially off-season. You'll want to support your businesses during that time. But events are great examples of what to support. You know, it can be in the visitor center. You know, I sent you, I'll tell you, I send a lot of reasons to keep it open, but really the three main ones are that you have those wonderful beach wheelchairs. You are really leaders in that, in providing that to people with mobility issues. It's a very important thing to keep. And if there is a way to manage that program, whether through a contract with one of the lodging properties down near the beach or whatever, if the city can't do it, I highly encourage you to keep that going. People love maps and visitor guides. Those could be distributed elsewhere besides that building. But you know, one of the main things for keeping a visitor center is the personal connection. The visitor center manager or the volunteers working there, they're local ambassadors, and they are kind of the first line of defense towards visitors, that to make sure that they understand the values that are important to the community. And that's, I think, is in a time that we are trying to prevent over tourism, which I'm sure in August people say, oh my God, there's too many people here. But we don't want that to happen all the time. And there are places around the world that have been dealing with it for a long, long time. So I would recommend starting with the destination management planning process. It takes, and I'll just give you a quick rundown of what it includes. I facilitate these things frequently. I'm doing one, I just did one with Rockaway Beach. I'm doing one with Garibaldi right now, and I'll be doing one with Bay City very soon. And that is a kind of a 3 meetings process. The first one, you talk about what is destination management. You set up, you discuss what your values are, what your assets are, and you do a SWOT. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I categorize all that stuff, all those things that people list, and then we go back and we say, okay, given this, given what you value, and given what you believe in, what initiatives do you want to build? And so then we go through initiatives and what each of those initiatives might cover. What are the tasks under each of those initiatives? And then the third is setting benchmarks and saying, what does success look like? And that gives you goals. And like I said, our former benchmarks were, you got to get that TLT up, you got to get more money, you got to get more visitors. And we've changed completely. We call our benchmarks the 3 R's, and that's return on responsibility, return on relationships, and return on investment. And that investment one is, how well are our businesses doing? How are we using the lodging tax to help our businesses? So we do things like workforce training, guest service gold training. I know you mentioned workforce housing as one issue that you might like to use the TLT for, your room tax for. And I know that Manzanita had a lodging tax prior to 2003. So anything that you collected prior to 2003 usually goes into your city budget. You can use that for anything. Now, you were able to keep that percentage even after the 2003 law that required a 70-30 split. 30% goes to the budget, 70% tourism facilities and or promotion. So you should have a fairly big budget to use for tourism facilities and some budget that you could work towards housing issues. So that's just something to think about, and it's something that we can offer to do for you. I enjoy those destination management processes. They're really fun, and it's often the values that you set up are the things that create the initiatives. So it's takes the focus off promotion almost entirely.
Anybody have any questions for Nan?
And in the communities that you've been working with on destination management initiatives, who's been involved with you? mix of people has been involved in those processes?
What makes them get involved? Well, usually.
No, I'm sorry, not
Oh.
what makes it, but what does a typical mix include? Is it all business people? Is it business people, community members?
It's a huge mix. Well, we have people from, like, for instance, in Garibaldi, which I have a second meeting next week, it was people from the nonprofits, the port, businesses, the city. It was a huge mix. Yeah. Recreational fishers, commercial fishers were there, city council members were there. Lots of input.
I guess the question is, do we want to go through this process and kind of define what we're doing before we try to open the visitor center again, or so that we have a plan? Or it kind of sounds like that's the direction we're trying to go, right?
Well, I think it's worth looking, more seriously and more in depth at the proposal that Nan put forward about. I hopefully there's a bit of an incremental process that can happen here. And maybe step one is just kind of trying to get the doors back open to the visitor center and get it operated. And then figure out how much energy and what timing we want to put behind what is a radical but probably important shift in using these TLT funds towards managing the community and not promoting, trying to get more bodies to come here.
Mhm. And that's true, even Travel Oregon hasn't shifted there yet. But more and more communities are needing it. And I know why Travel Oregon isn't doing it yet is because they depend so heavily on the city of Portland, Eugene, places like that are really suffering for room tax and getting visitors back. It's really bad. We are very, very fortunate here on the coast to be able to have had visitors who stayed and spent their money and helped our restaurants and our businesses and our lodging stay open. It's been a gift, even though I know in August it doesn't sound like that. It doesn't feel like that. But we're very, very lucky. We could be in a situation like Portland and we'd have so many closures of our businesses. I think Portland, the last report I heard, 38% of their restaurant businesses closed permanently. And we have had 2 restaurants in the entire county close. So we're doing very, very well. And then, like I said, until a recession hits, we take advantage of the wealth of lodging tax that has come in and put it to community use.
Well, on the short term, what should we do about the visitor center? Just go out and hire somebody and try to get some visitors to just sit there and pass out brochures, or do we want to be more creative than that?
Well, I think you could be really more creative in that. And I will tell you, I think you had a model for a business or for a visitor center mostly because you had Dan and his great group of volunteers. But visitor centers are closing throughout the state. Lane County shut their main one down that was on I-5. They shut it down. Salem shut down their city center visitor center. Portland shut all their visitor centers. And the reason is really that people are using their phones. Now, the people love maps. I know that when they come to town, they look for maps. That's the number one thing they look for. And we, of course, put out a countywide visitor guide, which we are going to have to reprint here pretty quickly. We had 55,000 printed and they're almost gone from mail-in requests and online requests. It's kind of amazing. But, you can have those maps and those visitor guides at businesses around town. So it wouldn't be, visitor center isn't the only place to get those.
So one of the things that I really appreciated about Dan and what he did, and I really don't want to lose if possible, is that Dan was really a glue. I mean, actually, I would say, and then Dan should respond to this. There's a little bit of time spent with visitors, a little bit of time spent with businesses, a little bit of time with the community. I mean, he just kind of was able to pull all of that together. And I think that's really important. I mean, if any one of us had a question about visitors or events or things that were happening, the first person I'd call would be Dan. Because
Absolutely.
he knew what was going on.
Yes.
And so I would hate to see us shut that down.
Mhm.
I also think if we could find the right person that, you know, and set up kind of a job description that would encompass that, then we could start to plan and to do the kind of destination research and what do we want to do, and you know how for us, I would bet that trails are going to surface as something that's very important. But again, Dan's input on those things was just critical, and I just would hate to lose that resource
Yes.
and shut the door.
Yeah, I agree with you. He was the source of information, the source of connection. He acted like kind of like a one-person chamber of
Oh, he
commerce.
was.
You know? And that's really valuable because like you just said, if you had a question, you just called Dan because he had his, you know, finger on the livelihood of the town, and not just Manzanita, also Nehalem and Wheeler. He knew what's going on. So yeah, it's I know, and I hired him away.
Oh, yeah.
I
I was just going to jump into that.
We may never forgive you, Nan.
I was going to say, why don't you just give him back to us?
Yeah.
I'll
I
make
just-
it up to you somehow.
I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that Dan is still with us. He hasn't died or anything.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no,
Just
he's here.
He's
He's
still with
here.
us. In fact, I'm looking forward to hearing his comments, but I'm
Yes.
intrigued by Linda's comment that suggests using and I won't use the word volunteer, but some kind of a coordinator at the visitor center, at least in a short-term basis, to help us in the process of destination planning and all the other things. It seems like we have within our community the kind of people that could handle that nicely. Maybe not to the level of Dan, obviously, but they could do a lot of good things for us. And that would be the place that we maybe should focus first, getting that position, and then using that position to catapult us into the destination planning, infrastructure planning, use of the TLT monies. But I am looking forward to hearing from Dan what his thoughts are too.
Hey, everybody. I am still here, as a matter of fact.
Oh,
Thank God.
Same spot, same channel. No, I think, you know, our community is lucky in a way that there's plenty of people. There's a nice pool of community-minded people to choose from who'd probably be interested in, you know, at least a scaled back version to begin with, perhaps. And I know from experience that plenty of our volunteers are still interested in coming out and helping out. So there's a good beginning base there. I did provide a list of duties I've done over the few years to the committee. And, you know, a lot of it was just, as I've said before, making it up as I went along, because especially in the last 18 months, bouncing back from crisis to crisis. But there's a really good list of things and duties to work from there, and ways to accomplish that. And, it, you know, like you said, you could pare it down and perhaps have more creative use of TLT funds to kind of winnow away what you want and what you don't want. But as far as, you know, I would agree with what's been said so far, as far as looking ahead for destination management. I think it's probably, I think regardless of what had happened with the visitor center, I think it's time had probably come to maybe look more deeply into something like that.
Mm-hmm.
so Nan and Dan, would you be willing to help us find the right person to maybe run that on a smaller scale possibly than Dan Haig was running it? Do you have any names in mind, Dan, of people you know in the community that might be willing to take on a part-time position down there and work to rebuild that volunteer organization again, as if we ever get out of COVID?
I've had people reach out to me, and I've just kind of been putting them on hold because I wasn't sure where it was going, but I do have, some names I can pass on or recommend, and I can definitely pass on my list of volunteers if anybody wants to reach out and contact them as well. And
Great.
as far as searching and advising, I'm definitely open to helping. That 100%.
And we can help, both Dan and I can help train. We can do guest service gold training with them and with volunteers. I think the city of Manzanita took part in that a couple of years ago, right before COVID.
Mhm.
So. we're
Well, and
glad to help.
I think the relationship with the county, I think we've not taken advantage of that in the past. And I think this is particularly with Dan there, because he knows us so well. I think utilizing your resources and your experience is going to be really useful as we transition to that next step.
Yeah, glad to help.
I just want to suggest so that I think, if I understand the concept of destination management, I think that if we do a good job exploring that approach and committing to that approach, that's going to drive, I would think, the job description of the visitor center director to a significant extent. And so if we hire someone on the front end as an interim step or a part-time basis to open up the center, that's one thing. But I do think I do think that the next Dan is going to have a job that is driven largely by the concept, which we don't have yet. We haven't created it yet. So I would just caution a little bit about, hire first, plan second. It may be that you're talking about hiring on an interim or part-time basis just to open the doors. But ultimately that position that Dan had will be different because we're going to have a different approach. And I just think we probably need to get the concept down before we commit to a full-time position. Or I guess it was never a full-time position. But
Well, it's not a full-time, and it's also an independent contractor at this point, and that may also be something we want to look at. I think it is an interim position to kind of get us through this process, and ultimately maybe the person, but I don't think that. I think that's setting it up as an interim position and transitionary position is the way to do it. I would agree with you, Jerry. Once we get our plan together, it may require a very different skill set.
right.
Well, how do people feel? Do they feel it's critical that we get the visitors center open again sooner than later, or not?
When I was mentioning getting someone in the position, and I was thinking interim as well, but I was thinking using that position not only to get it open, but to have a focal point for this dialogue that goes on in the community regarding how, because I don't think our existing staff, and Layla would have to answer this, but I don't think our existing staff has the capacity really to get involved in yet another initiative. So what I'm thinking is we get someone, yes, I realize we're opening that up before we're going through the planning process. I'm thinking of using that person to help us get through the planning process. And I think we have the capacity in our community to have someone that could achieve that.
Right.
And the other thing that I was intrigued by Nan's comment is that we have to be nimble here, because if we have an economic change, a movement downward, for example, or she called it a recession, I won't use the R word, but if we were to move around and have a different perspective, then we have to be nimble. We can't continue to go down a path as if everything is, terrific. So whoever we put in that position and whatever plan we end up with, it's going to have to be pretty broad in its scope. So my recommendation, and what I would encourage, is securing someone with Dan's help that he has knowledge of to get into that position, get the place open up, get the volunteers active again so that we don't lose them. And also to use that person as a focal point for going through Nan's prescribed process of destination planning.
Everybody
I
feel
think,
that?
I think that's a great idea. I think that
Love it.
is pretty consistent with what we were talking about. And I think that's the advantage of having that relationship with Dan in the county, is that we're not really starting from scratch. We really have some wisdom and some ideas already, and it will make it an easier transition.
Yeah, just my 2 cents is I would agree. I think an interim is the right move at this stage for all the reasons that y'all have mentioned already. And then doing the plan, and then that sets the stage for what the kind of the permanent position is. Because I agree, it may look a little different, but I think that that's a really neat way to go forward.
Yeah, I just have to reflect back to, I think it was to Steve's point. I mean, I've been active and part of this process for probably the last 10 years. And when we started it, we were in recession. I mean, we were struggling to get people here. And by the time we got the short-term rental tax passed, we were beginning to see the resurrection of people coming back. And then it just kind of went off the deep end. So those changes are going to be happening, and being nimble and able to respond to those changes, I think, is a critical component of this.
And I would say too, that any plan is always, I always consider it a live document.
Right.
You
Yes.
absolutely have to adapt. And I know people used to do 10-year plans, 20-year plans.
Mhm.
It's just that
If you're
doesn't
updating them every year, it's okay.
That's right. That's right.
you know, our world can be really different just in
Right.
5 years. So you really do have to make it a live document.
So are we, Layla, we kind of giving you a framework to work on here, do you think, or?
Yeah, I don't
How do
see
you
that
feel
Dan
about
has
this?
run away, so I feel like we got a good path.
Well, hopefully, maybe he can point you in the right direction to contact somebody. Maybe there's somebody down that's retired who wants to put in some hours and run that visitor center for us for a while.
I don't know.
Sounds like he's got some names.
Well, I will reach out. This is, I think, a good example of when you tap the experts to help you do something that's going to be really successful. So I feel like what we've laid out here is going to lead us to success in a way that's really inclusive of our community too, which is kind of top of line, I think, for all of us here. So I like the approach. Yeah.
Okay, well, sounds like we got a rough working idea plan to do what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Speaking of trails and tourist promotion, I don't know if you guys all heard, but we got the annual achievement award from the Recreational Trails program on our Neocani Mountain to Manzanita Trail along 101. And Connie Soper, who spent years working on that project,
Mhm.
we went up and did a video on the trail last week, which is they're having their annual awards banquet on November 10th. And of course, it's going to be virtual. So we'll probably post that video and that information on the city's Facebook page and stuff when they put that together. But if you haven't been up there, that we walked a little bit of the trail. It really came out nice. And it's a great addition to keep people off of 101, which has been, I've walked down 101 coming off the south end of Neocani Mountain to get home before. And that was treacherous when you had to walk on the highway. Anyway, that was kind of cool. So.
Yeah. We'll try to show that at the next meeting. Since the awards isn't until the 10th, we'll hold off, maybe show it in December.
It's only going to be 3 minutes long, so I suppose we could show that at a council meeting or something.
Yeah, I stuck it on the list just in case.
Okay. Do we get everything resolved here this afternoon? Anybody got anything else? We got anything else treacherous to deal with tonight? I don't think so.
I don't think so. We do have this update for the visitor center on the agenda. It's at the end of the night. Nan, I don't know, unless the council disagrees, that you and Dan need to be there necessarily. Would hate to have you have to spend another, I know you'd love to, but another 4 hours with us. So I think we can probably cover what we need to tonight. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for showing up, especially after I don't want to highlight that you just got back from vacation, but she just got back from vacation and she showed up for us today. So
No, we appreciate
really
that.
awesome.
So I think tonight you could just give a summary of what we discussed here this afternoon, kind of the roadmap of what we're going to go on.
Yeah, well, maybe Hans, you can give the summary of what you talked to the committee about, and I'll go ahead and give the
Okay.
update. Cool.
Yep, happy to.
Thank
Okay.
you. Awesome.
All righty. Has anybody got it? It's about 4:45 and we're meeting at 6 o'clock. You got just time for dinner. So has anybody got anything else before we adjourn? Okay, we'll stand adjourned till tonight. Thank you.
See you then.
Yeah.